Hello, everyone, and welcome to another insightful episode of Kingsgate Brief, the official podcast series of Kingsgate Advisors Institute. Our podcast brings together leading economists, policymakers, and thought leaders from across Africa and beyond to explore critical topics shaping the global economic trajectory. Now, today, or this episode, dives into timely issues, offering expert insights, strategic analysis, and actionable solutions to the evolving global and even local economic landscape. I'm so glad you're joining us today, and this particular episode promises to be truly thought-provoking. I am Olanubi, the Executive Director of the Institute, and today I am your host. We'll be taking a closer look at Nigeria's rebased GDP figures, the ideological shifts for structural transformation and accelerated growth in Nigeria. What does these figures really mean? What does it tell us? I mean, more importantly, what are the figures not telling us? In the light of the recent rebasing efforts, there is a renewed opportunity to examine the structure and drivers of the economy critically. While rebasing provides a more accurate picture of economic size and sectoral contribution, it also reveals underlying weaknesses, particularly the persistence of low productivity, informality, and limited structural diversification for the Nigerian economy. The rebasing exercise should go beyond numbers. It must catalyze deeper thinking about structural transformation and accelerated growth. Now, for this podcast series, we will analyze the new GDP numbers, what it reveals about the Nigerian economy, and also we'll look at the imperatives for ideological shifts when it comes to structural transformation, competitiveness, and even long-term development strategies. Now, to navigate this and to discuss this and more, I'm really honored to have today with me a very distinguished guest, Professor Olu Ajakaiye. Now, let me read his bio shortly so that we know what he has done and what his pedigree is. Professor Olu Ajakaiye is a fellow of Nigerian Economic Society. He is currently the chairman of African Center for Shared Development Capacity Building in Ibadan. Earlier positions he had held includes the Director General of the Nigerian Institute of Social and Economic Research, NISA, in Ibadan between 1999 and 2004. He also served as the director of the Research African Economic Research Consortium, AERC, in Nairobi, Kenya, between 2004 and 2011. He was the president of the Nigerian Economic Society between 2013 and 2015, and he is also a member of the National Conference. He was the vice president for the African Intergovernmental Council of Management of Social Transformation. That's the most of UNESCO between 2004. He was also the business manager of African Journal of Economic Policy and editor of ARC supplement of the Journal of African Economists, University of Oxford. He served on national working committees for the preparation of Nigeria's Vision 2010, Vision 2020, and Nigeria's Agenda for Vision 2050. Professor Ajakaiye was also the team lead of the technical team that prepared the Oyo State Agenda 2040. He is a member of the team that prepared the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan 2017 to 2020 and the National Development Plan of Nigeria. He has consulted for various organizations, which includes the World Bank, ECOWAS, UNDP, the British Council, etc. He obtained his BSc Economics from University of Ibadan, Nigeria, PhD from Bristol University, USA, and he was a John Holt Scholar at the University of Ibadan and a NISA Scholar at Boston University. He specializes in development economics and has published widely in this area. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome with me Professor Ajakaiye. Good morning, sir, and we are so pleased to have you this morning.
Good morning, Olumi, and it's a privilege to join you in this podcast. Thank you very
Thank you
much.
so much, sir. Thank you very much, sir. So before we go right into the full discussion, I just want to encourage our viewers to catch up on our previous episodes. Please do well to check our YouTube page. Just search Kingsgate Advisors Institute and hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, and stay updated. We would also like you to follow us on other social media platforms like LinkedIn and Instagram. Just search for the company's name and also visit our website to see what we've been doing and all the works we have on ground. So for today, I think it's time to just dive right into it. And sir, I'm going to start with something very interesting. I just want to ask you, what do Nigeria's rebased GDP number, what does it really tell us about the structure of the Nigerian economy? How should policymakers, the government, how should they interpret this number beyond the surface level optimism that we're saying? How should we look at this number critically in the light of the structure of the Nigerian economy?
Well, thank you very much again, my dear Executive Director. The rebasing process of GDP of any country is actually aimed at getting a more precise measure of the size and structure of the economy. This rebasing exercise has done that. It has now at least given us the latest figure when it comes to the size of the economy. It also gives us information about the sectoral distribution of the GDP of the economy. So to that extent, it's a wonderful, report. I also like to commend government and of course NBS management now for avoiding the long delay that we had between the previous rebasing and the one that was done in 2014, which changed the base year to 2010. We had a period of 20 years before we did, rebasing in 2014. This one is around 10 years, which is quite good, which I hope will sustain this process so that we don't repeat another long stay, and therefore lose, the precision that we require for policy making. Now, the information content of the current rebasing process and the data that we have is that, well, the size of the economy has actually expanded, reasonably. Of course, very, very low, but at least it's not negative. 3.13%, as at 2024, which is not a bad figure, having regard to the development globally and also within our own economy. But certainly we have to do more, because 3.1%, 3.2%, anything below, 8% is not likely to translate into what we all desire, which is life more abundant for the average Nigerian, job opportunities, and then robust livelihood. This growth rate, while not too bad, is not good enough. That's as we can consider, and I'm sure government knows that is the case. But at least we're happy that it's not negative. Now, when it comes to the structure of the economy, what we also have is that the structure has not changed between the last rebasing and the current one. In fact, the structure has become a lot deeper in the direction of excessive contribution of the service sector and decimated contribution of the manufacturing sector. And evidence abounds to show that the process of development is to move from agriculture into secondary activities, which is basically industry, at the core of which we have manufacturing, and then services, so that services can then be serving the economy. An economy where you have rudimentary agriculture, which we currently have, very rudimentary, low productivity, distributive trade that you have. That kind of economy is not the one that will generate the kind of jobs that will then make life more abundant for the average Nigerian. So the syndrome of jobless growth is actually still persistent from the data that we have. But what it shows clearly is that the managers of the economy, the leadership of the society at all levels, public, private, and at all levels of government, should now focus on the industrial sector, because if we don't grow our industrial sector, we will not, actually, get out of this jobless growth syndrome. So my reading of the data is that yes, it's a good effort. We commend the government, we commend NBS for funding, the process and producing this data. But what that showed us is that the challenges are still there, and it should energize our policymakers and our leaders to therefore know where to put their effort, and the effort will not be put on ensuring that the manufacturing sector and the industrial sector as a whole become the drivers of the growth and development process, because development is growth plus technological transformation. I mean, and also sectoral transformation, which is moving from agriculture to industry and then to services. What we are having now is a very, unusual arrangement where you have, dominance of two, rudimentary activity sectors, agriculture and services, leaving the core of the economy, the so-called missing middle, is a challenge, and I'm quite certain that the leadership of the country will actually pay attention to that issue. Where we can begin to celebrate the fact that we did it, and that the economy is not at least declining numerically. The structure is pointing to the need for us to do a lot more in the area of encouraging the growth of the secondary activities, basically manufacturing. So whatever we are doing that is complicating the manufacturers' lives, we should quickly look at it and abandon such a thing and return to what we actually help them to grow and develop. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. That was a very robust answer to the question. And I quite agree with all the things you said, particularly that first we celebrate the NBS for doing this rebasing at this time, which is very needful. We need to see an accurate picture of what the economic looks like. That's a good one on their side, but I mean, this is not the time to start celebrating that the economy has grown by 3.13%, or that the GDP in terms of nominal terms has become larger. The ideology, the intricacies of the structure of the economy has not changed. And like you said, in fact, these figures has revealed that the economy is largely driven by the services sector, which shouldn't be in an economy where the industrial sector or the manufacturing sector is still struggling. Now, in the light of that, I want to also follow up with this question. You have consistently argued for structural transformation. If you look at your works dating back to the 1990s, we've seen some of the works you've done that also emphasize the need for structural transformation. So what does this mean in the Nigeria economic context today? And why has it remained elusive? What are the key structural bottlenecks that has persisted over the years in the growth of the Nigerian economy, especially from the standpoint of a researcher that has done a lot of work in this line? What are the major bottlenecks that have persisted over the decades that has impeded the growth of the economy towards an industrial and also an industrial economy?
Very good. Thank you very much. I deeply appreciate your positive view of our effort over time. You know, the development process, like I said earlier, which has been tested over and over again, is that you move from agriculture to manufacturing or the industrial sector dominance, and then to services to support the process. The challenge we have had in Nigeria can be traced back to 1986. Before 1986, if you look at the development process in Nigeria, we are following that trajectory from 1960 to around 1985. The turbulence we had in the collapse of the international oil prices in 1981, which presaged the pressure on the part of all so-called development partners to ask Nigeria to change its strategy for developing the economy and demonize, as a matter of fact, the nascent manufacturing sector that we were developing at that time. The argument at that time was that, oh well, the exchange rate was undervalued, and therefore the manufacturers were being overprotected, and they were not making the best use of resources, and therefore it's better to just withdraw, pull the plug, and let them find their way. Anyone that cannot make it should get out, so that the small scale, the so-called informal sector guys, the desperate people, can then become the driver of the economy. And they were giving us this very bogus argument that, well, the informal sector is a labor sponge. If they absorb anybody that is thrown away from manufacturing, so everybody will be okay at the end of the day. In a sense, after the argument of whether you want to take IMF loan or not, then it ended up with the so-called homegrown structural adjustment program, 1986 to 1988. That behind that policy was a fundamental change in the role of government in the economy. The government was accused of protecting the manufacturing sector, and it was therefore advised that it should get out of the way. It was also that period you have this combination of Reagan and Thatcher in the UK and the US pushing this argument that government should get out of the way, government should get out of the back of the people, let people be free, assuming that government is the one that actually is a clog in the wheel of progress, forgetting that in developing countries and even in their own country at the earlier stages, they were exactly doing what we were doing. Instead of advising us on how to actually manage that turbulence, they then encourage our leaders to get out of the way. On getting out of the way, thinking that they are handing over to a private sector. The private sector that was not there. We didn't have really a private sector at that time. We had a government, shepherding some manufacturing, entities, a lot of which were multinationals, who were importing finished goods to us before, and arising from the various policies and the encouragement of government through the various national development plans. They were then becoming, interested in relocating their manufacturing processes into the country, but still importing, their inputs from outside the country. The idea was then to encourage them to gradually disengage from importation and begin to use local resources so that it can then become a self-reliant, manufacturing process. We didn't get to that stage when the turbulence of the international oil price came. Of course, we have to accept that efficiency, effectiveness in the implementation of the policies might have actually delayed the process. But when the turbulence came, it met us midstream. Our development partners, instead of helping us to navigate that turbulence, they just encouraged us to abandon the ship, and the ship started, going around the sea without any direction. Wherever it got to, where it was, wherever we are. The end of that process was that the structure of the economy then changed to what it is today, where the manufacturing sector that was around 20% of GDP by between 1975 and 1985. Then now collapsed to single digits. From that point on, it has started crawling, and it's still crawling, because the idea of government getting out of the way is still subsisting. And that's back to the point you raised, the issue of ideological shift. We must get out of this trap of thinking that government has no business in business. In fact, the business of government is business, because the purpose of setting up government is to make life more abundant for everybody. And if you look at section 16, of the Constitution, chapter 2 of the Constitution, is very clear what government is supposed to do. It's supposed to ensure that the economy develops in a balanced way, to ensure that there's life more abundant for Nigerians. I'm just summarizing it. Lawyers are better at articulating it more precisely. But what has happened is that that component of the Constitution has been completely abandoned by all, political leaders. In fact, since 1986, and accentuated, when we even returned to democracy in 1999, we started privatizing, and we are still thinking of privatizing in a very prodigal way. What do I mean? If you are going to privatize for development, you don't then take the proceeds of privatization and use it to buy cars for civil servants, paint buildings, because that's your capital. You're supposed to invest it in another, capital, goods, sector that will expand the productive capacity of your economy. Not to then spend it on frivolities, flying around, and then, kinds of interesting, essentially consuming your capital. Anyone that sells his capital and consumes the proceeds is prodigal. That's what I mean by prodigal privatization, which is leading us to where we are today. So I just hope that the story now, even around the refineries, around all kinds of government assets that people are now saying should be sold, if we are going to sell those assets, the proceeds should not be used to fund recurrent expenditure or to fund consumption. It should be used to actually fund productive capital in what I call frontier activities. So the bottom line, therefore, is we need to change our philosophy about the role of government in the Nigerian economy. Government has a responsibility for ensuring that the economy grows and that it is properly diversified. The current direction, which started in 1986, should be reconsidered. We should now get our government to be very, very efficient in the first place. And then it is only when you have an efficient government that you can have an efficient private sector. Because the private sector is going to be looking at what government is talking about. And I mean all of private sector, beginning from agriculture to services. If they see a government that is not really very concerned about efficiency, effectiveness, minimizing corruption, they will escalate it in the private sector. That's their tendency. Whatever you signal to them, they take it to and escalate it. So if you signal to them, look, this is a serious business. We are here for efficiency. We are here for minimum corruption. We are here for effectiveness. They will just take it and also escalate it. That's the way. So that's one. Second thing is that the philosophy of thinking that the private sector and government are competing or are alternatives, which we have to get out of that trap too. They are supposed to be complementary, and government is supposed to lead. When government leads, then after conquering the frontier, you can then pass it on to the private sector and use the process of that process of passing it on to the private sector to go and shift another frontier in other areas. And I just want to let our viewers notice one thing. As people perceive the UK, the EU, the US as countries that are in the philosophy of government has no business in business, that is exactly deceptive. It is not correct. What they do is that in the frontier, and the frontier for them today is even beyond elementary space exploration. It's deep space exploration, going to Saturn, going to Pluto, going to that's the frontier now. But you can see when they started going into space in the 60s, it was exclusively government, because no private sector guys was going to be able to get into it. But today, they have conquered a reasonable part of that of that frontier, and they have engineered the private sector to now take over the rear, while they keep on going into deeper space exploration. That's where you can see the complementarity and leadership of the state, where the state and private sector collaborate. They don't see themselves as alternatives. What the government does is to lead, and then once you conquer, you then hand over to the private sector and move on. And that's what I mean, that when you're going to privatize, you don't privatize and consume the proceeds. You use it to shift the frontier. That's what they are doing in Europe and North America. Now, but these characters from all over the place, because they are so-called development partners, they come and sell of this half-baked story instead of telling you the full story. That look, your current frontier is near us. Is getting manufacturing, to be active, getting decent jobs to be created, making sure that the cost of living is not unbearable, making sure that the exchange is stable and actually protective of your domestic producers. So that's our frontier. Now, once our government is able to do that, then you can now pass on all those instruments, which are companies that you set up in the process. You can pass them on to your own private sector, and the proceeds can then be used to now start talking about what other countries are doing. Imagine Arab countries are already also part of the space program. India is part of the space program. Maybe South Africa, I don't know. Maybe some other African countries, but the basics of Southern African countries, excluding South Africa, we are not even talking about getting proper power in place here first before we start talking about going to space. So we have a lot of responsibilities here. So my admonition, therefore, to summarize, is that let us get out of the trap of government has no business in business. Government should take responsibility as specified in our constitution. Section 16 should be looked at again. And if these people that are talking about amending our constitution should actually work on getting that section of the constitution justiciable, so that people can go and sue if government is deviating. Government has been deviating forever, since 1986. We have been deviating, and because that section is not justiciable, nobody can go to court and say, what are you doing? If you can make sure that section is justiciable, then the role of government as envisaged in our constitution will become, operationalized, and we shall then join the countries that. So the next rebasing will then show a different picture, where you then find that truly government will then concentrate on building this missing middle by engaging, and then, for example, all the privatized enterprises, studies have been done by my colleagues and friends to show that because we privatize them unconditionally, we sold them to people who just vandalized, and strip the assets and left. Now, government, imagine what they are doing in Ajakuta now. Look at all our steel rolling mills. They were all closed. They were sold to this so-called private sector guys, and they shut them down. If you go into those factories now, maybe all the machines that were bought many years ago, they have been stripped. At least each time I go to either Jos or Osogbo, I see the steel rolling mills just shut down. Very bogus signboard is there, but the place is dead. Across the road from machine, from the Osogbo steel rolling mills, in Osogbo, is the machine tools. That machine tools is also run down. They sold it to some, I don't know who they sold it to. But all of those things are dead. If you are privatizing in the context of development, that must not happen. You get the guy to come and tell you what he's going to do to make it even better, not to then destroy it. Look at what they did to Ajakuta. They were sold by some people, and then the government is now spending a lot of money to even bring it back to what it was before it was sold. And then talk less of now moving forward. Alaja, the same thing. So what kind of country is this? So if you continue that way, this kind of GDP that we see is what we're going to continue to see, where we're going to have missing middle, collapsing, missing middle, and we shall then start celebrating. Nigeria is now in service. We are leapfrogging. Well, that is deceitful and maybe, what we need to really be very, very careful about. Thank you.
Wow, that's really I don't even know how to explain what all the things you just said. It's taking me to a reflective mode. We've said it. I've had a lot of people say it over the time that the industrial sector, we've missed a lot of things. But I mean, putting it in perspective and forgetting the role of the government, not calling the government to accountable, amongst other things, actually has led us to where we are now. And the fact that everybody is saying privatize, 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 without really looking at after that what happens. Let us look historically what has happened to some of the assets that the government asset has been sold. Why are we at this point? Because it's easy to rejoice and see the economy is growing by 3.113%, or say maybe the economy is growing in size and the likes, without intuitively looking at what are the drivers and what is really happening. And what you said about government leading and taking the charge is very profound, and I agree with your perspective. But I want you to also probably zoom it a bit more on the issue with ideological clarity. So in your work, you've emphasized the need for ideological clarity in policy design, which you also gave an example of what we see in advanced economies, using the example of frontier when it comes to space and the likes. So what do you believe ideology is? Why do you believe ideology is very important, to achieving structural transformation? And, you've mentioned and you've related to what happened during the structural adjustment program. But do you think Nigeria has operated without a guiding economic ideology, even before, during, and after the structural adjustment program? The consequences of this, can you enumerate them for us so that we can see where we really are, that would inform where we are heading?
Thank you very much. Very profound questions. Now, the ideological posture of government from independence. If you look at the first National Development Plan, it was clear there. In fact, it was stated that government knows that government alone cannot deliver robust development. It needs to partner with the private sector and therefore, get development started. That was stated in the first National Development Plan, 1962 to 68. Unfortunately, the Civil War, all those things derailed that plan, but the philosophy is there. The second National Development Plan, which was, launched after the Civil War, 1970-75, then signal to the need for government to be more engaged in the process, because as at that time, our private sector was excessively dominated by the multinationals. All right, so government had to therefore take responsibility, because we didn't have robust indigenous private sector to partner with their peers from outside the country, and we could not count on the commitment of the almost 100% multinational companies. We cannot count on them to be sympathetic to the development requirements of our own country, because they are here to scoop and go. So that's their own thing. Their interest is in their own home country, not in their outpost here. They are here to just scoop and then see whatever they can send back home. So that's why we found that, like I said, when they were now shifting production into Nigeria, they were only shifting the end product, the assembly stage. The fundamentals of it remained in their own, headquarters at home, and they were charging, these companies all kinds of fees for support, for research, for management, and so they just remained here just to distribute. As a matter of fact, some kind of glorified distribution centers, but then they do some finishing here. The 1774 plan, luckily then benefited from the Arab oil embargo and the increase in oil price, and therefore oil came in. Unfortunately, by the time the oil revenue started coming in, both in dollar and in naira, the government appeared to have lost focus of ensuring that they now encourage these multinationals to deepen their own, backward linkages in our economy, by getting most of their raw materials locally instead of importing them from where, because they were saying, since you have foreign exchange, let us import this thing because you have no power, the quality of your agricultural produce is not very good, and therefore let us begin to import all that we are importing from home, from their own, network. So the result, therefore, is that we had, that process delayed massively. But what government did was then to respond by partnering with these companies now to set up some of the manufacturing outfits here. And now we saw massive, government investment in the private, in the manufacturing sector, in partnership with the foreign private sector organizations at that time. So that continued up to 1981, 85. By the time we had the Second Republic, things started, moving the way we are moving now. All kinds of ideas were coming from everywhere. So that philosophy was practically abandoned. And when the turbulence of the oil, crash in 1981 came, it actually gave impetus to the fatigued, government to actually get out of the way. So when the advice then came from our friends from, the so-called development partners for government to get out of the way, it met a willing, a tired government, who said, okay, yeah, let it go. So they let it go, but they were letting it go in a very prodigal way because they were then told, privatize. So when they were privatizing, and then we didn't see what they did with the process of privatization. A lot of investment in the vehicle assembly plants, in the fertilizer plants, in the petrochemical, every sector, agricultural processing, everywhere. Cotton ginneries everywhere in the country. They were encouraged to government to get out of the way and give it to the so-called private sector, a lot of which were foreigners. And once they took those companies, they just shut them down and then returned to what we were doing before independence, which was importing everything. And that's what we are still doing today. And that's why you find that our service sector is not servicing our economy, it's servicing, other economies from where we import all these finished goods. Now today, Nigeria, import bill is now dominated by finished goods, including very embarrassingly, until recently, imported petroleum products. When we have the crude material here, we were so I don't know, we were so disoriented that we even lost focus and didn't think that it was an embarrassment for Nigeria to be the only OPEC member country that was importing PMS, importing diesel, importing AGO. When it has a huge quota, 2 million, crude that it can produce and export. So you can see all kinds of embarrassing situations that we can find ourselves. So my bottom line therefore is, once we go back to, when we dial back, let's dial back to at least the second national development plan and take responsibility for managing the Nigerian economy and do the following. Our leaders must be committed to the development of the Nigerian society. That's first requirement. Second, they have to get out of the trap of thinking that government is the problem. Government is not the problem. Government should be the facilitator, should be the promoter. Whatever government is doing to make them look like the problem, they should deal with it. And importantly, that's where the issue of corruption and inefficiency comes in. 3, your civil servants must be very well, funded and protected, because they are the line of defense. The political class will come and go. The steady ones are the civil servants. That's the engine room. If you don't keep your engine room working very well and you subject them to this, vagaries, the people are now, retiring and being afraid of what happens to them after retirement. People are not sure of the security of their jobs. Some politicians came, fire some people, bring some people in. Once you do those things, then the guardians of the system will become loose. and then people will not come and plunder your country. So we must get our civil service to it back. We must rebuild the capacity of our civil service, give them, proper job security, give them appropriate remuneration, because part of the negative effect of the SAP was that they were saying, we are spending too much money on the civil servants. And I'm hearing stories even today. People are saying, they are only 1% of GDP, of the society. Why are we spending so much money on them? As if it's a gift. They are workers. In any manufacturing outfit, the proportion of expenditure on workers may not be very large, but it is very critical, because without doing that, all your machine will be dead. So just like you fight in private sector, you must have it also in government. The civil servants are the engine rooms of government at all levels. They must be sharp and well trained and well remunerated and well protected, so that they can actually say the truth to power. In the past, when a civil servant writes his position in file, government takes it very seriously. These days, when you raise an issue that doesn't resonate, for example, with the feeling of the political class, they return the risk of getting penalized. So the tendency then for them to fold up and start singing the song of the leadership. That kind of thing should be abandoned. So once we get out of that, and we now get into an environment where we now start developing our own indigenous private sector to partner with our government, and then we are necessary bring their own peers, because it's only a private sector agent in Nigeria that know the credible private sector agent outside Nigeria that they can partner with. But to destroy your own private sector and say, let foreign direct investment come in. If foreign direct investment come in and they come in 100%, they are likely to plunder you. One should encourage that, have your own, virile, strong, the Dangotes and the Bua, all those people that should be there. They are the ones that will partnering with their peers. They are the one that will select the appropriate one. They are the one that will do proper negotiation with them, with government at their back. And therefore, ensure that whatever those people are doing, they are in consonance with the national development aspiration. Finally, we must get back to proper, rigorous development planning. What we are having now, all kinds of agenda, everybody comes 7-point agenda, 10-point agenda, this and that, personalizing, the process is going to make the process unsustainable and unstable. Because once the person whose agenda is off the scene, they dump the agenda and they start waiting for the agenda of the next person. That's not the way to develop. You must get a proper development plan in place, which will actually work with the private sector, with the civil servants, and with the political class. So that when the political class leaves, there will be at least 2 permanent agents, that is the private sector and the civil servants, to then welcome the new leader and say, okay, this is where we are. This is where we wanted to go. So what do you think? So that he can then reflect his own thinking, but not to then rubbish everything and say, forget about it, and then this is my own. So don't and everybody starts singing. Everybody is singing. Well, the first sentence is now this person's agenda. The first, whether it's relevant or not, even when they are drinking water, they say the agenda to make the person feel. That's not the way to develop. So we have to depersonalize our development agenda. Once we do that, I think we may be back. So like I keep saying, when we then do the rebasing in the next 10 years, we may then find that we are progressing. What we have now is that we are growing, but we are not developing. Thank you.
A lot of work to be done. Thank you for that rich perspective. So many things to reflect on, really. So I want to even now ask, what would you say if we want to take this moment where we are now, looking at critically where we are in terms of development? How do we now develop a fully fledged industrial policy? Where do we go from here? How do we improve our value chain development? How do we increase productivity? How do we now sort of use this moment, this reflective moment, to chart the course to that point where we don't just see growth and increase in numbers, we see impacts on development? How do we do that?
Thank you very much. Very good question. On the how, the first step is to have a proper diagnosis of the current situation with respect to our missing middle which is the manufacturing sector. What are their challenges? Right now, majority of our manufacturing, companies, they depend on imports of almost everything, and they just do assembly finishing here. That's where we are. In that kind of a system, you must therefore ensure that any suggestion, any idea, any agenda that is presented to government, they should subject that agenda to rigorous analysis and come up with the following decision. How will this suggestion affect the cost of production in my country? That's the first question we ask. Anybody from anywhere, World Bank, anything, development partner, wherever they are coming from, whatever they are making as a proposal, and also even indigenous, advisors, like your institute, when you give your advice to them, they should interrogate and say, Madam, what you are telling us to do, what will it do to the cost of production of our industrial sector? What will it do to the expansion in their output in that sector? What will it do to the income that will be generated in that sector, which is going to say how many jobs are going to be created? And then how will this your suggestion, if I can check all those that I've asked, how will it then contribute to my revenue? Our revenue should come from expansion in the economy, not from raising the tax rates. And I'm happy that the philosophy of the tax reform is in the right place, where they are saying, look, our interest is not in raising the tax rate, our interest is in raising the tax base. So all advice and suggestions that come to government should be subject to that analysis. Once the results, or the outcome of that analysis are positive, in the short, medium, and long term. If for example, in the short term, the effect on, say, cost of production will not be exactly salutary, you must be able to convince government that in the medium to long term, the cost will come down. All right, and it must be timed. It's not just don't worry, it will come down. No, tell us when do we expect it to come down, so that all our agents will know what they are going to endure, and therefore when they start seeing life more abundant, light at the end of the tunnel. And I remember where we keep on saying, it will get better, but we don't have an idea of when. It's going to be very discouraging to people to say, okay, let's hang in there. That's why you see that many of them are, particularly in the manufacturing sector, they just shut down and go and start selling, and then see service sector growing. They're abandoning production, they are going to servicing. So that kind of thing should not be done. That's the first step. The second step is implementation of whatever development agenda you have articulated, which address the challenges of this. For example, the key universal intermediates for the production sector, private manufacturing, is power. And if you look at the history of development of, say, the former Soviet Union, one of the launching pad for them was to ensure that they had power. They solved the problem of power. So if we have a government that says, look, during my own tenure, I will make sure that power is not only available abundantly, but it's also affordable. All these B band, whatever we are talking about now, these are all, for me, initiatives that will not ask and answer those questions that I just mentioned. If you came to the Minister of Power and say, we have to raise the tariff to band A, band whatever, the minister says, my friend, thank you. How will this, your band A, band whatever it is, affect the cost of production of my manufacturers? All right. How will it affect, their output? Because if I go to band A, band whatever it is, what's happening to the supply side, to the capacity to generate, and how I make sure that I'm able to deliver power to them, good quality power, that is also environmentally, friendly, green power and all those things. all of those things, and how will this then encourage them to expand and generate, income, which will then feed into government. If government then has to give subsidy in the meantime, we know that in the medium term, when the expansion comes up, government will realize more revenue to knock off the need for that subsidy on the system. But in an environment where the subsidy is just expanding forever, but the supply is shrinking. I'm hearing trillions of naira is now subsidy on power, but we don't see the power. And the manufacturers are also all grumbling, but saying they are still using their generator. So what's the purpose of this initiative there? So once we get through all of that, then we shall now get back to the role of government. Any struggling, key sector, particularly the intermediate and capital good producing segment of the manufacturing sector, government has to now get into partnership with, multinational, because we don't have credible local manufacturers in that area as yet. But in the finished goods sector, food, beverage, and tobacco segment of manufacturing, we have reasonable, private sector operators that only need to be supported. But when it comes to intermediate and capital good producers, all the assembly plants, all the steel plants, all the pharmaceutical, intermediate producers, the chemical, sector, government has to go into partnership with credible foreign, manufacturers of those commodities, so that the capital goods and intermediate goods sector of Nigerian economy, which was developing by the time we went into this, destructive SAP policy, can then be revived. Because by 1985, many of these things we are already assembling a lot of capital goods, beginning from air conditioners to freezers to fridge, and the knowledge, that we are then transferring to our people at that time was becoming much more interesting. But once they collapsed, and we are now importing used everything, vintage that are already abandoned, so technologically we are even not capable, because we are not on the frontier of knowledge when it comes to the latest manufacturing techniques and processes. So we have our mechanics and all these guys very, very crude, because the version of the vehicles that we are importing, the version of the equipment that we are importing, they are disengaged technologies. So they are maintaining dead technologies, whereas those people are moving to frontier technologies, and we are just dragging there. So government should have to get in touch with those guys and then build capacity using our polytechnics, using our monotechnics, and using the university engineering department to actually produce the caliber of young, competent people who can then be supporting this industry, and then have arrangement for developing the private sector, indigenous private sector, that will then partner with government, so that eventually government will then withdraw in an orderly manner, and then leave the sector now to the Nigerian private sector, partnering with their peers from outside, with government, in the back, watching what's going on. And the proceeds of such disengagement of government should never be used to buy vehicles, should never be used to pay all kinds of funny, fees and travels to all kinds of places. It should be used to invest in another frontier, either in that sector or in the global sector, so that we can then become part of the. You see, if we don't do this, in the next 50 years, when the Europeans and the Arabs and the Indians and the Asians are going to space, even to live there, we shall be struggling here, and they'll be dumping their refuse on us if we are not careful. That's how when they were doing what they were calling exploration in the 13th and 14th century, and then they were discovering us. That's how they were, from the Portuguese, the Spanish, and the Europeans, British and so on. That's how they were going into the sea to come and discover us in Africa. And then before they colonize us. If we are not part of the discovery of what's going on in space now, in the next 50 years, we may then become people that they will then be discovering again. So So we should be part of the process of also, so that when they want to partition the space, we should be there. If we are not there when they're partitioning the space, the benefits and the process of state, they will keep the waste, they will dump on us here. So let us be very, very, careful. So our government has responsibility for taking charge and ensuring that we have a systematized industrial policy, a systematized technological advancement process, working with the private sector, not working against or seeing government as doing them a favor. We are all partners in this process. Once we do that, then we shall be on our way. So industrial policy that can then come out of that process will be very robust, will be very sustainable, and will be very rapid in dealing with the challenges of this missing middle in our GDP. So that by the next 10 years, when we do another rebasing, the structure of our GDP will now become more like maybe 20% agriculture, 30%, or 40% manufacturing or industry, and then the rest can be service. And that service will not be the one that is dominated by trade. It will not be dominated by modern services, particularly all this tech type thing, sophisticated financial system supporting a sophisticated economy. But when you have a rudimentary economy, your service sector can only be rudimentary too, and that's why you find dominance of trade, even in the service sector as of today. All these technological things, they are there, but they are very small. They want to be very big to support an equally, sophisticated manufacturing or industrial sector. So that's exactly the way I see it. And therefore, our manufacturing, our agriculture will also become very sophisticated because they will not be producing high quality agricultural produce to feed the agro processing. Right now, everybody is concerned with getting food on the table in their raw form. So there's no connection between agriculture and industry. All that we are saying, the one they did in Lagos, produce Lagos, is to go and get people to go and produce yam and maize and all kinds of things from Taraba, from Niger, and all kinds of places to bring to Lagos to consume. They are not talking about ensuring that you produce those things. Let them in Taraba convert it to processed agricultural produce and then ship to Lagos. The argument to go and just bring your cows to Lagos, we slaughter them out. That's not the way to develop. That's the way to survive, but not the way to develop. So those are the kinds of things that I think. So our connection between manufacturing and agriculture should be more organic. The idea should be to ensure that whatever comes out of the farm is actually processed by industry, and that industry that is processing it is getting not only the raw material, but also the capital goods from domestic sources, so that we don't keep on depending. Because if we don't do that, what America is trying to do today is because of their own excessive, reliance on quote and unquote trade under the so-called value chain thing, global value chain, and therefore they surrendered their own production capacity. So Trump and these people are now trying to say, we made a mistake, but maybe the way it's going about it may be a little bit abrasive. But so that we don't get into that kind of situation where we lose. In fact, we have not even had. We lost the little that we had, and we have not been able to bring it back on track. So we need to therefore be very, intentional and deliberate about ensuring that we put in place appropriate industrial policy, which is organic. It's not just about industry, it's about agriculture, it's about industry itself, it's about services. The services and agriculture must be connecting to the industrial sector so that we can then have a more robust economy. So to then think that we have industrial policy that can be taken out of the economy is not going to be correct. What is correct? Everything should be organic. Everything should be internally consistent and interconnected. Using the input-output framework, the input should be coming from agriculture, should be coming from engineering and capital goods into manufacturing, and therefore services that will then be servicing both sophisticated agriculture, sophisticated manufacturing will also become sophisticated. But in a situation whereby you have rudimentary services serving a rudimentary economy, and you are saying you are growing at 3.1% is not it's not the kind of economy that I would like to see in the next 50 years.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you, sir. That's really robust again. And, you've said a lot of things as to what the role of the government should be, what in terms of drafting this industrial policy and how it should be embedded within the entire economy, not just an isolated report or document or a framework, as it were. It should be embedded in their culture also, that will also service the service sector in that sense. I want to ask, as we are getting to the end of the recording, probably have like 2 more questions, depending on how time permits. I just want you to just probably short, in a very brief way, what is the role of the private sector in all of this? How do they come in play to support the government? You've said that they're supposed to complement each other. How does the private sector come, and how does the government also provide that enabling environment for the private sector, so we begin to see the desired outcome and also see a cohesive sort of relationship between the two?
Thank you very much. I have this pet idea. I call it public-private interface. Not public-private partnership. It's public-private interface. And what does that do? In every sector, at all levels, government should identify the private sector operators in every sector in their own domain, and also at national level, and regularly consult them. Set up a kind of a deliberation process where any idea that is coming from wherever, from advisors, from development partners, from academia, from friends and family, let that group of private sector, government, and labor, all right? Because there are the three partners: government, private sector, and labor. Don't leave labor out. Don't let them be protesting. Let them be in the room too. And in that deliberation process, it's not a place where people will say, give us an enabling environment. The question is, if we give you this, not the enabling, tell us exactly what you want us to do. Okay, reduce the number of hours where it takes to register. This very little things. You say you can register in 2 minutes. Yeah, but what are you registering? You are registering a shop to come and be producing Coca-Cola. Is that the kind of thing you're talking about? When you're talking about people that will establish very credible, development enhancing manufacturing, it's not this 2 minutes come and register. No, it's a serious business. So all these enabling environment people that are emphasizing it takes a long time to go to get a certificate, to get approval from the government. So make it very brief. Brief to do what? The more complicated the production process is, the longer it takes to process and ensure that you have everybody properly protected. So in that council, in that committee or council, whatever it is, they should be there to say, if you do this, private sector can say, Mr. Government, if you give us roads, give us power, give us security, we will give you jobs, we give you income, we give you tax. So everything will be able to be properly articulated. And then we now say, okay, we will do our part. When we do our part, we shall then be looking forward to your own part coming. That's where the partnership comes in. It's not the question of just give us whatever you want, leave us alone, don't bother us. No. Because it is people's resources that we are using to give you this environment. When we give you, it's an investment. What are you going to bring back to us? So once there's that kind of, and then labor union, when this is happening, there should be no strike. And employers, make sure you pay them. Don't start sacking, don't start depressing or giving them incredible, working conditions. Make sure that everybody is happy. Government will also ensure that we do our part. When you have this tripod constantly engaging, then you have to see that the private will be coming there to take responsibility, not to be demanding only. They say it's now conditional. If you give us this, we will give you that. Government, okay, if we give you this, you will give us this. Labor, so if you do this, we will ensure that our people are efficient, they are more honest, they are not destructive, they are more, efficient, they are more prompt, So all of us would have that, and then there should be regular review meetings. That after we are given the road, after we have given the power, Mr. President, but you promised us that by the time we do that, we give us jobs. We have not seen jobs, so NBS has said the job is not there. What happened? Then they tell us the new challenges that they are facing, and then all of us work that we now resolve this. And in a sense, that collaborative arrangement is my own thinking, and now I call public-private interface, not public-private partnership. Public-private partnership is a framework for swindling government. All these characters just come and swindle government, they take government money, or when the government changes, they keep on asking for all kinds of adjustments and sometimes abandonment. But if it's in that kind of a context, when government, private sector, and labor constantly deliberate on the development initiatives, and each person, each group makes a pledge as to what they will do, then fine. Then that framework is the one that will then avoid system capture by a few people who will then be using the system for their own private benefit and therefore abandon society. That system will also be an environment where corruption will be more manageable because they know themselves, my friend, this thing you are doing is not correct. So we don't want this type of thing. So and of course, private sector we also include the financial sector. So it's not just manufacturers. It includes the financial sector, it includes technology people, but also it's not at the individual level, it's at the leadership of the organization. They are all organized. They have organized private sector, isn't it? So it's the leadership of those organizations that should then be there, not Mr. A or Mr. B, because Mr. A being there will be working towards making sure that his own company does better. But when you bring it as when you bring the leadership of the group, is the one that will now return to the group and report to them. This is what we have committed to. So Mr. A, Mr. B, Mr. C, please do your part, and I will report back to them. So that kind of a way is the same thing. Leadership of the labor union, leadership of the government, at leadership level at all levels, and that is only at federal, at state, at local government level. That kind of collaboration with there, and therefore it can then be cascaded, and escalated to a level. But all of this working from the same national development plan, domesticated at the state and local government level, so that everybody will therefore know that what we are doing is in consonance with the national development aspiration. And that's where I was saying earlier, depersonalize the development agenda, make it national, make it our own, not that of Mr. A or Mr. B.
Right. Very insightful conversation. We've said a lot of things, and I love the conversation to keep going. But at this point, I think we're going to conclude with this. A lot of things to reflect on, really. A lot of issues you have raised, some of the things we can do. But I just wonder, this just on the side anyway. I just wonder, is it that the government is not listening, or is it that the feedback are not reaching them? Because sometimes some of these, my background and some of my work experience, I've worked closely in some circles where I know that government has this, sort of have this technical competence. People that are technocrats, they have them at their disposal that can tell them and point to them what you can do. The likes of NASG, even NES, what they've been doing in terms of advocacy, collaboration and the likes. But I still wonder, even in advisory, I still wonder why we are not seeing, we have a lot of recommendation that government can actually work on and get this thing, we can get it right in Nigeria. But I just wonder, as a young economist and as an emerging leader in this space, I just wonder why this political willpower is so strong that the governments are not able to reflect on the recommendations that technocrats has given, scholars have given, and we are still literally circling and reinventing the wheel and still doing the same thing. There's a saying that if you keep doing the same thing, the same way, you will keep having the same results. Sadly so. But sir, I just want you to conclude with this 2-in-1 question. I want you to give success advice to the government, if you are to advise the government right now on 2 critical reforms that they need to do to jumpstart the economy, in terms of structural transformation that we want to see. What would that be? that would have impact over the next decade, what would that be? Secondly, to say young economists, because we have a lot of young economists in our audience, and policymakers that are upcoming policymakers and the likes, what would you advise them? How would you advise them to think differently when it comes to issue of the Nigerian economy? Not just in relation to structural transformation and the likes, but in a way to see the economy, in a way to think the economy. What would that advice be? That's a two-in-one. First, on what government reforms that you would suggest the government to kickstart right now that would help in jumpstarting the economy. Then, what would be your advice to young economists, young policymakers that are just coming up? What would you advise them? How would you advise them to think the Nigerian economy, especially in the place where they are seeing themselves as the policymakers in years to come? How would you advise them to think the economy?
Thank you very much. The first one is very simple. Currently, most of what we are doing, they are escalating cost of production. So government should go back to the drawing board. All these reforms that we have been pursuing since 1999, they have to recalibrate them and ensure that anyone that is going to escalate cost of production should be avoided. And that begins with this the philosophy of subsidy is bad. There is nothing wrong with subsidy. What is wrong is inefficiency in the deployment of that subsidy. So let them get out of that trap of saying government should stop subsidizing. Government should subsidize to bring down cost of production. And that begins with what we are doing now in the petroleum sector. What we are doing in the petroleum sector is disabling. There's no question about that. It's disabling the economy at all levels. So I would recommend to government to go and revisit all of those, what we are doing in the monetary sector, this current interest rate regime. You may have to keep whatever they are doing in the Monetary Policy Committee going, but government should then have development banks delivering credit to particular, segments of Nigerian economy at rates that are disengaged from the monetary policy storyline. Let them continue with their stories, but let government, take responsibility for ensuring that credit is available at affordable and reasonable rate. Anyone that is borrowing money from the Nigerian banking industry today at the interest rate of 20-something%, 30-something%, is actually not going to use it for production. Because if you don't go into production, it's going to fail. So you're then going to go into distributive trade, which we just, within 3 months, the money is back, it gives you the money. So the effective interest rate on him is not 27, it's 1/3 of 27. So it's free. So what we need, therefore, is to ensure that that one is done. Anything that is cost escalating, from interest rate to exchange rate to subsidy on the universal intermediates, power and electricity. Government has to get out of that trap and take responsibility for ensuring that we deliver these inputs at affordable and reasonable rate to bring down the cost and make the Nigerian economy more attractive to bona fide producers. To be singing very nice songs by saying portfolio investors are coming. Nobody develops on the basis of portfolio investors. You develop on the basis of real sector investors. And real sector investors are going to be looking at what is the cost of production and what are the drivers. The drivers of cost of production today are the exchange rate, the cost of universal intermediates like power and petroleum products, and then low productivity labor. In fact, the Nigerian labor is quite competent, but because the environment they are operating in is very disabling, they then begin to cut corners and become less complementary in their program. So they need to get, and then, like I said, you must do this always in consultation with the private sector, so that we say, if we give you this subsidy, what are you going to give us back? Because by giving them all these concessions without commitment on their part, it's what gives room to corrupt parties and all these incredible tendencies, and that is also what makes the subsidy regime permanent. If you say, okay, you need subsidy, okay, we give you, over how many years are we start disengaging, rolling back, orderly, reducing, eventually getting out of that one and putting the subsidy in another area? It's not that subsidy should be out of the way completely, and no, you put it in sector A. As soon as that sector gets out of the way, then you take it and put it in sector B, so that you can then have a more robust system. Like I said, it should be done in the context of consultation, because there's be commitment on the part of recipients of this subsidy to say, okay, if we give you this, what are you going to give us in return? We don't give you subsidy and then start telling you that you cannot supply, or the price cannot come down. That will not be acceptable. So if government calls in, the operators in the energy sector, operators in the petroleum sector, operators in the foreign exchange market, I say, come. These people are complaining, and they're also on the seat. Manufacturers, they are grumbling about the current interest rate. They are grumbling about, we will set up industrial bank. We have this bank of industry, right? If the bank of industry gives you interest loan at 9% interest rate, what are you going to do? What are you going to give us back in terms of output, in terms of employment, so that in the next 2-3 years we will not need the same level of subsidy? So at the end of the day, in fact, you will not need subsidy again, because everything will have become quite orderly, and can then be on your own and even be able to go and borrow internationally. That's what they did in Malaysia, for example. That's what they did in South Korea. That's what they did in Indonesia. I don't compare Nigeria with Singapore. Singapore is an island state. It's not the kind of economy you start comparing with our own. You have to compare, similar societies, complex and large. Malaysia, South Korea, and Indonesia. Those are the proper comparator countries. Not these island states, small population, or even some of these Arab countries. There are very few people, but we are very large. So when you see what those countries did, is exactly what I was just describing. Now, when it comes to what our young ones should be getting into the profession, should think about in relation to the Nigerian economy going forward, they should then provide the intellectual support for a government that is more developmental state. It should be what our government should imbibe, and the intellectual support for it should come from our young economists. So what are the requirements of a developmental state that, interestingly, is specified in our constitution? Section 16 of the constitution is very clear. So what our young ones should then be doing is doing analysis, perceiving the relationship between the government and the society, government and private sector, government and labor, to constantly, ensure that, the government remains in the lead, but they should also pari passu be developing a virile private sector to take over as soon as they conquer the frontier, and the proceeds of that disengagement process should be used to shift the frontier. Our economists should then be doing, of course, you see, it's not to say don't do neoclassical economics. You have to do it, because in the rear, that's where neoclassical economics works. In the frontier, it is developmental state that works, government working with private sector. When you say neoclassical economics at the rear, it doesn't mean that government is completely out of the picture. Government should be there, but not as an activist. Government should be there only to be sure that everything is running systematically, pari passu, and when there is turbulence, government should quickly come in and rescue. And you see, we have got living experiences. When crisis came in the early 2000, and there was financial crisis, and there was crisis in the US, and the manufacturers were in trouble. It is interesting that it is the Republican government, George Bush Jr. in government, that actually started the process of saying we have to support our manufacturers. All right, government has to come in because there was turbulence. Financial system was in trouble, manufacturing sector was in trouble, everybody was complaining. So government came in and rescued. In fact, they nationalized some of the companies, but they have turned them back now. And the same thing happened in the UK when they had a crisis. Government came in, rescued, and as soon as the turbulence is managed, then they return it to them. So that way, government should be there watching like a hawk to ensure that everything goes, and when there is trouble, quickly come in, rescue, and return. But on the frontier, you must be there actively shifting. So our young economists should therefore get out of this dogmatic, like you say, ideological posture, a corner solution thing that is either this or nothing else. No, it's a combination. At the rear, it is more of private, but government is constantly watching and ensuring that everybody is behaving well. All right, because if you leave them to their own devices, they can soon do you. Particularly when you have these friends from outside the country polluting the minds of our simple-minded, people. Then at the frontier, government should take control and constantly push. And at the bottom of this is efficiency and minimization of corruption. And you can only do that when you have this consultative process, because it's that process that will then moderate the tendency. Because anyone that wants to steal our money, he cannot do it alone. There must be a private sector guy that's working with him. There must be a banker that's working with him. There must be a worker that is there. But if they are all deliberating together, everything will be exposed to be on the table. Now, this corruption, this man, you say you stole our money. This is the bank where the money is. Mr. Bank, what happened? Why is your member becoming an agent of destruction? That kind of a framework is what you want to therefore moderate everybody. And therefore, there will be national commitment to national development agenda, which must be endorsed by all of these actors. Once that's the case, then we have 1, stability, 2, sustainability, and the flip-flop, the so-called policy somersault will be minimized. So all of us have a role to play. The intelligentsia, our young economists, and the government and the other stakeholders, manufacturers, private sector operators, the labor union, and our government must be ready to work as partners, not as adversaries. There's nothing, you cannot be adversarial about Nigerian economy. We have to work together because no single one can do it alone. We must constantly work together and then make sure that we advance the prospect of our people. Thank you very much.
Wow. Thank you so much for that conclusion. Thank you for that rich perspective. And as you've all heard it, our viewers, for youngest economists out there, aspiring economists out there, there is a lot of work for us also to do in terms of competence, technical competence, and also in our perception of the economy. It's more philosophical and ideology than just a discipline, and it's important we take position, as to what Nigeria do we want to see? And as a technocrat, where do you want to position yourself to advance the economy? So, and this is the point where we conclude the show. It's been insightful, it's been reflective, it's been eye-opening. Thank you so much, Prof, for taking out the time to be with us today, this morning. Thank you, sir. And to our viewers once more, as I usually encourage, please visit our YouTube page, look at the previous episodes we've recorded. We've touched on different issues that are very timely and are very topical. So you might want to, interact with those resources, share, like, comment, follow us also on social media. We're on LinkedIn, Kingsgate Advisors Institute. We're on Instagram, and we're on YouTube. And you can, of course, visit us at www.kingsgateinstitute.org, and that's where you will see some of the things we've been doing. So till I come your way again next time, keep staying safe and see you again. Bye. All right, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. All the best.
Thank you, sir.
All right.